think the flow of people coming in is slowing down, so that's good. Alrighty, so do want to welcome everyone, welcome our clients and partners and friends of Mallet McLean to this new exciting series of economic updates from with Cameron Bagrie. That we're really pumped to be bringing this to everyone, and looking forward to the extensive program we've got for the next 12 months. So we'll just flick through here. All right, so the outline here today is really relevant, and we've timed this pretty perfect actually with the new formation of the coalition government. So we probably couldn't have got that any better. But Cameron's going to cover off the state of the nation as he sees it, and he always does that with great candor. So it's always good to have him on board and getting his point of view. He's also going to talk about what this means for your business going forward in the next sort of 12 months. And my favourite part, because I've listened to Cameron a few times at a few different Xero events actually, where he said, hey, look, if you're motivated and committed as a business owner, there's some amazing opportunities here to succeed. So that's my favourite part. And that's after hearing him about 3 or 4 months ago, I was like, we need to catch up with Cameron and get him on board with us. Then we'll do some Q&A. So we've got a few questions of people that have registered. When they registered, they put some questions in. But we encourage you to put some questions through the Q&A portal during the session. Please be aware that if you put a question in there under the Q&A box, it's anonymous. No one else will see that. Only I'll see that, and I'll moderate the questions and the Q&A part at the end there. So if you're thinking it, other people are too. So put a question in there, and I'm sure Cameron will be able to answer it. The webinar itself will go for about 60 odd minutes with the Q&A at the end. We really want, I think the questions at the end are the main part here, where you can ask really bespoke stuff and get some bespoke answers. So please, do put some questions in there. Take some notes. If you're having trouble hearing us, you probably won't be able to hear this message, but it's under the mute button is where you can find your speakers. So have a look there. But use the Q&A box, probably not the chat box. The chat box usually goes to everyone, but so use the Q&A box when you're asking a question. We've done a lot of firsts here at Mallet McLean, and we've always been innovating ever since inception all those years ago. Just to name a few, we wrote the Accounting for Farming textbook, which is pretty cool and special. We had the first mainframe computer in an accounting practice. Hired bankers to work with our clients in different ways, early adoption of cloud-based software like Xero and Figured, and we've even started new businesses like Nelson and Tasman. And we have over 100 team members, and we've been awarded accolades for being a top employer in our region. So this is another first. This is the first for an accounting firm to partner with an economist and have our very own chief economist to keep us up to date with and looking forward so that we can all run smarter, better businesses. So we're really pumped about that. Now, many of you on the webinar will know what we do, and it's always been about much more than the numbers. We have over 100 dedicated and talented team members across the South Island, and we're seeing right now that our contact with our clients is increasing every year, and that's a really good thing. We're out there on the field with our clients, mentoring them with things like business planning, cash flow management, dedicated quarterly focus sessions, and providing a wraparound support for our business owners so that they can run smarter, better businesses. With the 100-day plan from the government released, we feel it's really important to highlight the pending change in the trust tax rate. So we really wanted to highlight that today. It's going from 33 to 39. There was no mention of actually scrapping that. So if you're a business owner right now and you've got a trust that owns shares in your business, please get in touch with us before March so that we can have a bit of a chat about how we might be able to minimize some of the tax going forward for you. We'll also be pushing some of that stuff out in our newsletter before Christmas. So this new partnership with Cameron is us really leaning into our mentoring side of our business. It's the first in the industry. No one else has got a chief economist in the accounting game. And it's a program that we've developed with Cameron, so it'll be super valuable for our clients. We're going to be running a series of webinars that we target specific industries, for example, an agri-specific one and a small medium business specific ones. And we're also going to have Cameron in person in events in Invercargill and field days in Nelson and Tasman to give us first-hand information on how to take advantage of the economic forecast. Lastly, we've got dedicated updates from Cameron, which we will share through our website, our newsletters, and they'll be on a monthly basis. We're very excited to launch this program with Cameron. He's an obvious choice for Mallet McLean because he has deep roots in the South. He's a Highlanders supporter, which is great. We were just chatting about that earlier. He's got great candor and he has a straight shooting approach to forecasting the economy. So we're pumped to have him on board as part of our team. And he's even wearing one of our polos by the looks of that. So that's great, Cameron. So Cameron, I'm just going to hand over to you now. I will stop sharing my screen and pass over to you so you can get your slides up and running. So I'll stop sharing there. So thanks for coming on board.
Hopefully that's banged up. Can you see?
Yep, that's working
well. Thanks for having me, and I'm going to take you through a little bit, session one, a little bit more of a helicopter view of sort of where New Zealand stands. And I guess if there's one phrase that I'm using at the moment to illustrate where we are, is that we're going to have a bit of fun over the next few years out of some times that are not so fun. It's pretty clear. We're in what's called a little bit of the economic payback side of the cycle. We've got an inflation problem. When you've got an inflation problem, the economy needs beaten up a little bit. That's the economic reality, particularly anything that's interest sensitive tends to bear the brunt of that. But when interest rates move up and you put in what's called a capital charge, you got to add value. You got to learn to manage and take real risks. That's what interest rates actually do, is that they take away all the free money and they make it a lot more challenging in regard to making money. And my personal view is that if you're a good operator, the next 2 to 3 years are actually going to be some of the most opportune times to make some pretty bold decisions and get out there and have fun. Because I think it's fun when you get rewarded for what you do, not what the market does. And that's a story for the next 2 years. It's not about market-driven growth. It's about getting market share. And there's a big difference between the two. And if you can get market share during the tougher times, when the good times resume, hellishly hard to pull back going forward. So just some bigger picture views at the top. I know the government today is coming out there and they've got their priorities, cost of living, crime, etc., etc. To me, if you want to get an appreciation where New Zealand could be in 20 to 30 years' time, look no further than the quality of the education being received by kids today, because they are stewards, they are the guardians of the economy tomorrow. And what we're seeing, it doesn't matter whether you look at school attendance, achievement, what's called PISA scores over the last 10 to 20 years, there's been a very substantial systemic trend from being one of the best performing countries in the OECD to steadily right down the list. Just to give you a statistic, 47% of kids regularly attended school in term 2 of this year. Regular attendance is there 9 days in 10. So it's not like half the classroom was full. That's 47% were there 90% of the time. But what you need to do, you need to dig into the details to have a look at what's called the tail. And if you have a look at a couple of things, there is a larger proportion of kids that are attending school less than 70% of the time. And this is not just year 12, year 13 kids that are not there. They might have part-time jobs to support families. This deterioration in school attendance or non-attendance is across the board, primary, intermediate, early years of secondary and later years of secondary. And what we're also seeing is that there's a very strong ethnic mix to this. more than 20% of Maori and Pacifica kids attended school less than 70% of the time in term 2. Now, I look at those sort of statistics, and it is an absolute bomb ready to go off in the next 20 years. So you're going to see me in the media. I'm just writing an article for the Herald that one of the biggest economic priorities we need to be focused on in the next few years is fixing the education system, and you should start with an absolute clean out at the top of the Ministry of Education. Now, the Prime Minister et al. Is out there running a bit of a line that the previous government has wrecked the joint. That's an overall exaggeration. New Zealand's credit rating is still intact. Unemployment's moved up, but it's still 3.9%. But there are aspects to what the government is saying that is quasi-correct. We've got some pretty deep-rooted structural problems. Inflation is problematic, and there's a strong domestic element to it. And that means the economy needs to cool its jets. We're getting economic growth, but what's called population-adjusted growth, GDP per capita, is negative. So the only reason the economy is growing is through what's called bums on seats growth. It's not through productivity. We've got a large current account, which just personifies a big unbalanced economy. We spend too much and we earn too little. Education, attainment, crime is problems. We've got across the board issues in healthcare, infrastructure. We're now a nation of potholes. One of the big variables to pop in the past 12 months has been local authorities' finances are being exposed. And we've known about this stuff for a long time. So it's nothing new. But of course, interest rates expose debt or balance sheet vulnerabilities, and interest rates are moving up. And lo and behold, out of this, we start to see some appetite for things that should have been going on for a long time, i.e. look at your balance sheet. Should you really be holding ownership in a port, ownership in airport shares? So suddenly a whole lot of those hard decisions that councils didn't want to embrace, we're now starting to have those hard decisions. And that's ironically, out of research, you start to see good news. You start to see a lot more different thinking in regard to, you put the sacred cows on the table. You no longer kick the touch your problem, because you're getting into that sort of narrower window where you need to actually make some big, bold decisions. And that's what resets are all about. And what we're also seeing is the ideology in regard to just whacking firms with higher costs has had a byproduct, and the byproduct has been firms making less money. Firms make less money, while businesses pay less tax. And they pay less tax, then all of a sudden the finance minister, either the previous one or the current one, has got a little bit of a fiscal hole in regard to financing necessary expenditure going forward. So these are all what we call reset variables that are just saying, look, we need to get back into our economic lane. And one of the big challenges of getting back into your economic lane, and I know the government of today has got their big list of challenges. In my mind, our biggest challenge is division. And I guess if you want an illustration of that, just have a look at the election result, where the combined vote of the National and the Labour Party was 65% combined. That's what we call the political centre. That's the mainstream vote. 35% of the vote moved out to the periphery. And when you get very strong growth in what's called the periphery, it makes it really hard to drive unity and chart resets with an economic course. And we've already seen examples of that in regard to the concessions that needed to take place in regard to bringing three parties together. This is not new to New Zealand in regard to what we're seeing. It is a global phenomenon around the world. And on some levels, it's actually a relative strength. In an absolute sense, division's not great. But I guess I challenge anybody, just go have a look at Uncle Sam America. And if you want an appreciation of what a divided society looks like, that's one of the big personifications. So yes, we've got, a certain divisiveness across New Zealand, young versus old, urban versus rural, Maori, non-Maori, renters versus landlords, all these sort of things, which makes charting an economic course more difficult. But sometimes you've got to sit back and think about the bigger picture. And out of that division in New Zealand, we're probably in a relatively better place than what we're seeing around the globe. So, what does that mean in practice? and actually means people get incentivized to still shift to New Zealand. But just some basic economic aspects of division. Yeah, division makes it really difficult to chart economic direction. As I've said, it's a global phenomenon, and New Zealand, in a relative sense, and it's the relativities as opposed to absolutes that actually matter. Yeah, we look better. Our division in New Zealand tends to be worse the further north you go. And what does that do? It drives really strong movements in variables such as what's called internal migration. We tend to focus on external migration, the flow of people in and out of New Zealand. There is a very strong internal migration theme around New Zealand. And this is people typically leaving the likes of Auckland. Auckland typically loses 10 to 14,000 people every year from Auckland, and they go to South Northland, they go to Tauranga, your Cambridges, your Christchurch City is losing people to Waimak, Selwyn, Wellington loses to Kapiti, losing to Masterton, etc., etc. The other thing about division that I'm focused on is that I don't think we use the phrase equality of opportunity enough. We tend to get caught up in equality of outcome. In my mind, if you want to get away from a whole lot of the treaty contention, that sort of stuff, let's embrace equality of opportunity. And the brutal reality is that Maori Pacifica kids do not get the same opportunity. And that means more money needs spent on them, which you express that through an equality of opportunity lens. I don't think you're going to see the same blowback as when you think about just specific entities just getting more money because of the ethnic makeup of the entity. What we're also seeing globally is that division or political tension is now starting to impact creditworthiness. And this came through about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, where Moody's, their risk assessment of the United States government's credit rating went down. And one of the big reasons was political polarization. And once again, political polarization makes it really hard to chart an economic path and drive unity and some sort of conformity in regard to where you're going. Now, we've seen the new election result. It wasn't too much of a surprise, and lo and behold, business confidence popped up straight away. Just be very careful interpreting business confidence. Business confidence is statistically biased lower under a Labour government and higher under a national government. Business confidence is not a great economic indicator. It does not match the business cycle or GDP. We tend to focus a lot more on other questions within business confidence surveys. If business confidence surveys are good, business confidence questions are not. You need to focus on what firms are saying about their own business. Are they making money? Are they employing? What are the investment going forward? Intentions going forward? And I guess if you want an illustration of that, if you look at ANZ's business confidence survey, which has a business confidence question, business confidence is up. If you have a look at profit expectations for the year ahead, and this is a net balance figure for the agriculture sector, which is the old backbone of New Zealand, people by and large are expected to make less money than more. And that's the real-time barometer in regard to where we sit. These are the asset test variables. That feel-good factor being a bit more confident ultimately needs to translate into real economic variables, which is profit expectations, employment, investment expectations. We also tend to focus a lot more, we talk about general inflation, consumer inflation and how people are doing it pretty tough because inflation is a thief that takes money out of people's pockets. Inflation is also an equally, if not bigger thief to the business sector. And the key variable here is margins. If your costs are moving up and you can't pass on price increases on the other side, and we're starting to see more and more evidence of that, that goes straight to the bottom line and the epicenter of business health, which is profitability. And one of the big dynamics we need to see in the next few years is can't just keep on pointing the finger. Businesses need to adapt. And that you do that by embracing technology. You've got to have a ruthless obsession with productivity. You've got to work out a way to restore that viability to margins, because without that viability in regard to margins, your profitability and your whole business model becomes exposed. But we are still seeing an awful lot of what's called cost push inflation, which adds to costs, but the consumer is starting to push back against price increases on the other side. And what that does is it acts as a compression variable in regard to margins. Just looking quickly at the global scene, and once again, this is a helicopter view. The Internet Monetary Fund released their latest forecast about 6 weeks ago, and it was highlighted navigating global divergences. There was some good news in this document in the sense that they thought the global economy was going to embrace or deliver what was called the soft landing. The soft landing is getting rid of inflation without beating up the global economy too much. It's sort of what we call the holy grail of economics. But if you dig into the document, there was a couple of things that New Zealand needs to be alert to. And what they talked about a lot was called risks, and not just in the near term, but in the medium term. And there were 4 big risks, and 2 of them are particularly related to New Zealand. Risk number 1 is China. And China is obviously our biggest export market that takes 27% of our exports. It used to be 30%, but it's come down in the last 6 months. The second thing was the relativity or relationship between what's called geopolitics and commodity prices. As the global economy starts to fracture, what the IMF points to is that we could see a lot more volatility across commodity prices. And New Zealand is a nation that is very dependent upon trends in commodity prices. And then risk 3 and 4 was just inflation. If it's sticky, interest rates higher for longer. And then the risk that we don't see what's called fiscal consolidation, or politicians being a lot more sensible with their spending, not just here in New Zealand, but around the globe in particular. And if governments are not a lot more prudent with their spending decisions, guess what? Global interest rates gets dragged higher. So, we hope we're going to get the soft landing, but the International Monetary Fund pointed out, and the title summed it up, navigating global divergences. And what we're seeing around the globe at the moment is some pretty profound trends. For the past 30 years, we've lived in a world which we call all about being globalized, internationally connected. Global trade as a share of GDP was rising. It got accelerated with China's emergence. Pre-COVID and exacerbated by COVID, what we're now starting to see is that globalization is facing pushback. It's facing blowback. Offshoring is now being replaced by what's called nearshoring, friendshoring, or get the thing just close to me because I want control over that supply like chain. And I guess if you look at one of the biggest trade relationships around the globe, you look at the share of US imports that are coming from China. And what we're seeing is that China's share is down, and Canada and Mexico, the friends, their shares are starting to pop up. The same thing we think will happen in Europe with the likes of Poland. And of course, China's share of US exports has started to ease off peaks as well. Now, this sort of stuff personifies a fractured world. And I guess if you step back, you think about, look, New Zealand likes to play in both the US, what we call the Amazon, and the China, the Alibaba world. And behind the scenes, America and China are having a little bit of a ding-dong over what's effectively a power struggle. And the United States is trying to slow down China's economic advancement by restricting access to technology. They're embracing the help of China, the Netherlands, Germany, that sort of stuff. On the flip side, you got China's got the backing of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and there's a whole lot of other countries, Argentina, these sort of places that want to join the BRICS. But this is a personification of a fracturing world, and this is now impacting New Zealand. So if you look at MFAT, they produced a document 2 to 3 months ago, Navigating a Shifting World. And New Zealand's a trading nation that is reliant upon global themes to drive our economic health, our well-being, growth, exports, etc., etc. And what MFAT pointed out was that, look, the world is shifting. The rules-based system we've been used to is now been replaced by power. We're seeing this in the Middle East, Ukraine, Russia, China, Taiwan. Security is now driving trade, security in food, energy, and technology. And efficiency has been replaced by resilience, and just in time is now all about just in case. Now, these are tectonic shifts to how we've been thinking about trade. Yeah, we haven't seen these sort of shifts for a long time. And my personal view, it demands, we're going to need to have a pretty big rethink within New Zealand, across government, within the export sector about how do we adapt? What's our strategy going forward? And what's obviously a far more polarized, divergent world. You know, ironically, security and trade could play into New Zealand as an economic strength because we're a food producer. But we're not having those conversations at the moment in regard to how do we navigate or how do we start to shift our strategy to navigate these tectonic shifts. Yeah, the Defence Review talked about a powerful China, you know, in the South Pacific. So guess what? We need to spend more on defence. You spend more on defence, there's less money available elsewhere. And the New Zealand Secret Squirrels, yeah, they talked about China's intelligence services, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But the big story here is that, look, New Zealand is very heavily linked in regard to economic fortunes to what's going on in China. But what we're seeing globally is this fragmentation. And yeah, once again, we like to navigate, you know, we like to be Switzerland and navigate that balancing act. And, you know, ironically, it's probably a good thing, in my view, that Winston Peters is back, because he's probably the most astute foreign minister we've seen in a long time. And he's going to need all his, you know, diplomacy skills to keep New Zealand on track, because we need to navigate a big balancing act. Yeah, just to illustrate what's been going on, New Zealand's share, China's share of New Zealand's exports, they're trending up sharply since 2006. The Labor government did a great job negotiating, getting that free trade deal. China's share of New Zealand imports popped up again as well. What we're seeing the past 6 to 12 months particularly is that China's share of New Zealand exports has come back down a long way. Now, to be fair, the same thing's going on with imports, and we're sort of back at levels we were in 2019, 2020. Now, yeah, maybe that's just a sign of a cyclical term. Yeah, China's going through a slow growth phase, so we shouldn't need to be fretting about it too much. Yeah, but China faces some pretty deep-rooted structural challenges as well. You know, the property market there is in a lot of trouble. And if you have a look at the export numbers we've seen the last 3 months, you know, the value of items going up to China last 3 months compared to a year ago, it's down 20%. Yeah, that is a big, massive decline. And you talk to the red meat industry, you talk to what's going on within the pip fruit or horticulture industry, and they're just demanding less. Now, the hope is that this is cyclical and we're not going to go through a little bit more of a deeper structural adjustment. But I'm keeping a real close eye on that export performance, because, you know, our hips are joined in a lot of areas with China. And I guess if there's a glass up full version out of that, yeah, observation one is that, to be fair, we probably need to be identifying alternative market, because yeah, anything up around 30% overall concentration is too many eggs in one basket. And red meat and forestry has got huge concentration risk. And secondly, it is going to drive, and good on the government, because they're going to go hard on this, yeah, looking for other markets. And the big one we're going to try to pop in the next couple of years is going to be India. And if we can get that one, it offers huge opportunities going forward. Globally or locally, what's the big theme? It's still inflation. Inflation is ruthless. And of course, we've had the Reserve Bank out in the last 24 hours, which surprised everybody and said, look, interest rates could still have to move up again. It's not their central scenario, but they are alluding to that risk. Yeah, how you get rid of inflation is you lift interest rates, asset prices fall, lower profits, job losses. I just see Chorus is putting off people pre-Christmas. Something breaks. Inflation is followed by disinflation. Disinflation drives another easing cycle and another big recovery in asset prices. Now, have we really seen anything break around the globe? Have we seen a big increase in unemployment? The answer is no. Have asset prices really taken massive hits? They did in 2022. 2023 has seen stabilisation. Commercial property is one we're watching very closely because it was a bit late to the adjustment party, and it's going to be a big story in 2024. But you're getting inflation down now faces, it's a bit of a different playbook. We've been in a world for 30 years where inflation hasn't been a problem. Why? We've been globally connected. We've offshored, we've outsourced, and outsourcing has been cheap. Just in time has worked. It's been all power to the employer, not much power to the employee. What we're now starting to see is that some of those disinflationary forces that helped for the last 30 years, they're reversing. Globalization, offshoring is now onshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring. There's a lot of power being exercised within the labour markets around the globe. Unemployment's moved up, but globally we appear to be short of workers still. Demographics, the baby boomers are starting to spend. Ironically, that creates opportunities in sectors such as healthcare et al. And they're all traveling, buying e-bikes and buying golf clubs and, having a jolly good old time. Climate change means consumers pay more they pay. The assumption seems to be yes. We're going to check on that. But all this adds up to an inflation picture, and we're seeing it globally where inflation's coming down, but it's still proving to be real stubborn. And one of the areas we're going to need to focus on to get rid of inflation is it's going to drive the need for a lot more innovation, efficiency, and streamlining costs. And yes, compliance costs, fewer coming out of government is going to help, but ultimately the business sector is going to have to do a fair bit of the lifting in regard to this. And New Zealand has had an economic model that has been too reliant upon labour inputs. And when the cost of labour moves up, guess what? It encourages you to innovate, embrace technology, start to think about doing things fundamentally differently. So what have we seen in the past month? We've seen interest rates actually come back down, although they popped up yesterday. But you've got to sit back and think about what have we seen since 2021. Since 2021, we've seen the yield on a New Zealand 10-year bond has gone from around 0.5%. At one stage, it got up to be 5.5%. That's a 500% increase in 5 percentage points increase in interest rates in the space of 3 years. The last time we saw this was 1980. Interest rates are still low in a historical sense, but the movement has been unheralded in 40 odd years. Now, interest rates moved down in the last couple of months, but of course, what we also got in the last 24 hours was the Reserve Bank provided a bit of a wake-up call to expectations interest rates could come down further in 2024. And their story is, look, inflation is still a problem. Now, it's proving sticky. It's taking a bit of time to come down. Headlines coming down, but core inflation is still elevated, and domestic inflation is still up in 6%. Population migration is adding to inflation. And what they also, and it was interesting to see that they had a bit of a direct shot at the government's policy program. And the direct shot was there. Look, if you want to put tax cuts or big spending increases into the economy, and you're not taking money out on the other side, what's called your fiscal stance is expansionary. And if your fiscal stance is expansionary, then that's going to require us to probably neutralise it on the other side. So they discussed increasing the official cash rate. Did they decide to increase it? No. But it's a warning shot that we face a bit of a long ask going forward. Now, I don't think interest rates are moving up again. One of the reasons is that because the lagged impact of interest rates moving up is still coming through the system. So people are refixing. It's taking time for the dairy sector, the business sector to feel the full impact. My expectation is that dairy debt per kg mixed solid is going to ultimately be up in excess of $2 per kg And what that sort of means is that you're talking cost structures there overall that across the industry get up close to $8. And that's a pretty big revenue number that you need to be receiving on the other side. There's 170 billion worth of mortgage debt to refinance in the coming 12 months. The Reserve Bank knows that. And it's one of the reasons, despite talking a big game yesterday, I'm not convinced they're going to need to go yet. That said, the design of that tax relief package out of government is going to be very critical in regard to whether it adds to aggregate demand. But the Reserve Bank has still got the luxury of a bit of time on their side, but their patience is being tested. Why is their patience being tested? Because inflation has now been away from your 2% target for quite a long time. And when it's away from target for quite a long time, the risk is that it starts to reshape pricing behaviour. Migration has surged, which on some levels has been a good thing. When I pulled this chart together, migration was 100,000. It's now up at 120,000. And the good side of that is that it's adding to labour supply. What it's also doing is it's adding to housing demand, and we're starting to see that come through rental data. So migration has two effects on your economy, both demand and supply. The effect 6 months ago looked to be broadly neutral. The effect now looks like it's more stimulatory to demand than supply. And that's good for housing. But what it also means is that if it starts to put pressure on rents and construction costs, which are big parts of inflation, it's an area the Reserve Bank feels like it needs to respond to. That's one of the reasons they went hawkish yesterday. Just a caveat around the migration numbers. We've seen a big number of New Zealand resident tourists that have gone over the last 2 years, and we're not quite sure where they are. Normally, people go, they come back. You might get a short-term mismatch from year to year. That mismatch is quite a big number in the order of 150, 200,000 people in the last couple of years. Now, I've got a sneaky suspicion our migration numbers might be slightly overcooked. The housing market is actually two-sided at the moment. You talk to anybody in residential construction or the volume of concrete that's being poured, the trend has not been the industry's friend there, and the number of building consents, whether it be for apartments, townhouses, houses, has been declining steadily over the past 2 years. And that's monetary policy hitting the sector. It's also access to credit. It's also the fact that construction costs have moved up 20% in the past 2 years. So it's becoming a lot more difficult or unaffordable to build a house. Conversely, house prices have actually started to stabilise. Your house prices are no longer falling. If you look at the last 3 months, they're up slightly. And one of the dynamics there that's going on beyond migration demand is that, it's what's called Tobin's Q. And Tobin's Q is the value of the market value of a house versus the replacement cost. And this is how it works. Residential construction costs up 20%, well, the value of the stock of housing has dropped 16% from its peak at the end of 2021. What does that mean in practice? There's a 36% swing in favour of buying the existing stock as opposed to building new. So one of the things we're seeing in the market at the moment is that buyers are being perfectly rational and starting to think a little bit differently. It's hard to make the numbers stack up on new builds, but guess what? I can buy existing stock. And this is where inflation is both the enemy of physical assets, i.e. it lifts interest rates, but inflation ultimately offers protection into physical assets. Now that's happening in the residential market at the moment. Over time, it will take place in the commercial property market, but the commercial property market still needs to see what's called cap rates move up a long way in the next 12 to 24 months. And cap rates moving up means commercial property values moving down. Final two slides, I'm keeping a very close eye on what's called the stress metrics. And I know there's the occasional article that gets out there about all these people that are not paying their loans. The stats actually did not back it up. there is a proportion, there's not a big proportion that's facing real stress at the moment. Talking to the banks, most people are well ahead of their mortgage run rate. A lot of people, when interest rates were low, they kept their mortgage repayments the same, so their principal payment went up. And that's allowed them to get a long way ahead of their required run rate. We are seeing non-performing loans are moving up, but still off a really low base, and there's nothing frightening in those numbers at the moment. But as I said, I'm watching them like a hawk. The other data that I keep pretty close eye on beyond credit card bills is zeros days to be paid data. And the past 2 years, we've started to see a slight trend up. But days to be paid are still well below levels where they were pre-COVID. Some of this is people using technology to be paid a little bit quicker. So there's a structural element to that. I am seeing working capital deterioration within bank accounts. So the transaction balances of businesses has actually hit a bit of the reverse button over the past 18 months. And that's consistent with what we're seeing in regard to the tax take. So we know there is some squeeze that's taking place, but it's still coming off a pretty healthy position. To wrap up, just before we get into questions, is that, look, the economy's sort of skewed, spluttered, skidded outside of its economic lane, and we've got to get back into our economic lane. We need to be very careful with the rhetoric. The economy has not been vandalized. The economy has still got a whole lot of good elements out there, but there is certainly a big rebalancing and some pretty hard and bold decisions that needs to take place, particularly in regard to the economic base. And wellbeing needs that economic base, and the rural community in particular is responsible for a big part of that economic base. Central banks' disinflationary plans has been challenged. Inflation does look a lot more stickier. What does that mean in practice? Interest rates, I think, remain up a little bit higher than what people would perhaps like. The glass half full to that is that it offers opportunities. And let's not forget, when interest rates are up, you're taking real risk to make real money. And that's the environment that you sort out the good players for the not so good players. I'm watching geopolitics, geostrategic issues very closely. This is not the fun-loving, globally connected world we've been used to for the past 30 years. It's a world that is fracturing, and New Zealand needs to adapt. For businesses, it's all about the macro you can't control. You have a ruthless obsession with what's called the micro. These are all the small things: productivity, costs, investment to reduce costs. Just tweak every lever you can to restore health to margins, because they are the epicenter of health. A change in government is going to help, but they're no magic bullet. And in fact, some of the policy prescriptions, the solutions that they're putting on the table, I think are unnecessary. Put it this way, tax relief would not be in my top 10 policies that I think the government should be pursuing, but it's pretty obvious that they want to put money in people's pockets by the second quarter of next year. I think there's a whole lot of bigger picture issues that they need to be looking at, but ultimately, growth and wealth creation across the economy, it's got to come from the business sector. And there's only so much finger pointing we can do towards the government. So I'll wrap up there and bit of time for questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cameron. That's it's always great to get your insights, and there's a lot of positivity in what you're saying there. So pretty exciting. Now we've got a number of questions, so I'll do my best to run through them. There's one here that I've actually got two questions that I'm going to link together here. It's around what do we need to see before businesses start taking on a little bit more debt in 2024? And that sort of leads into what the lending situation will look like over the next couple of years from banks around helping the economy.
Right. So there's a couple of things, right? Observation number one is the demand, right? And demand is a function of profitability. it's a function of opportunity, and it's also a function of the preparedness to take risk and invest. And what we're seeing out there at the moment is, as a general rule, your demand is pretty mediocre. Your people are a lot more in consolidation mode. Some firms I'm talking to are looking at getting their balance sheet in good order because they see some opportunities around the corner at good prices. Yeah, and there's always those sort of things that come out of these sort of what we call cyclical corrections, resets, etc., etc. But yeah, banks are not exactly being, people are not exactly clambering to banks, asking for a lot more money. We are starting to see a lot more requests for working capital.
Yeah.
And yeah, banks will look at that on a case by case basis. If you think you're going to need money, go to the bank early. Do not wait till you got a big problem and then go to the bank, because by then it's a big problem and odds are the bank is going to be a lot less helpful. The other side is supply. And there's a couple of things going on there. Look, one, and it's the reason I got another business called Chaperone, helping businesses with banks. Banks have become, by and large, vanilla housing related bucket shops where they just like to take the easy money and lend on a housing loan as opposed to lend on a business loan. And that's not good for New Zealand's productive base. Yeah, we're not going to get more wealthier selling more expensive houses to each other. So I'd love to see the Commerce Commission investigation into banks look beyond retail banking at business banking, because banks make 60% of their profits outside of the retail arena. But for some reason, the government doesn't seem to realise that. We are also seeing that banks staff, because they've been cutting costs, they have fewer people in key positions with these things called credit skills. And that is a real big problem. And how do you get around that? Ultimately businesses are going to have to take a lot more responsibility for making sure that when they put in the requests for new lends, they've got a decent story in regard to what they're doing, how the bank's going to get repaid, but also about how you're managing risks around that lend. You can't lose sight of the fact that your banks do not just lend through a traditional accounting lens. They put a risk lens on it. That's why you charge the margin, and you need to realise how that lens gets looked at.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Cameron. What's your view on the FX rates and forecasts on the New Zealand dollar?
Right, so I'm surprised the Kiwi Australian dollars remain this resilient. Kiwi US has popped up. I don't think it's going to go too much further. One of the reasons, well, there's a couple of reasons. Look, number one, that there seems to be a bit of over enthusiasm that the US Federal Reserve is going to be cutting rates in 2024. I think their inflation, like other countries, is going to be a little bit more sticky. And you change that perception, suddenly the New Zealand dollar is back down at 60 cents. Now, New Zealand also needs a sustained period of currency weakness. Why? Because we've got a high current account deficit. So we used to think about fair value for the Kiwi US dollar being up in the mid-1990s, 65 cents. The 2000s, fair value was up around 70, 75. Suddenly, 75 didn't seem so expensive. We could live up there. I think fair value for the New Zealand dollar is now back around 65. And we need a sustained period over 5 years or even 10 years where we sit south of 65. We need to screw the scrum more in favour of the export community and less in favour of importing. And that's what a weak currency does. So, there's a lot of bouncing around that's going on, but in New Zealand's economic fundamentals at the moment, the current account, economic challenges do not justify too much more of a push higher in the currency, subject to where the US dollar is going directionally.
Cool. Brilliant. Okay, I've got here a question around the migration. Are we seeing higher skilled people into the country, or is it mainly sort of backpackers on working visas, um, or the comment here, taxi drivers? Are we getting those higher skilled people coming in?
There's a students, awful lot from the Indian community. Yeah, the mix is not ideal. You know, you have a look at those articles that we're seeing where the media has talked about people that are coming to the country and they're being crowded into homes, etc., etc. Yeah, it's not doing New Zealand's brand. It's named very well in regard to the experience when they come out of here.
Yeah.
Migration is a function of both inflows and outflows. We're seeing record inflows and record outflows. So there's a lot of New Zealanders, particularly young New Zealanders in their 20s, early 30s. They're off. And so if I have a look at the composition of who's coming in versus who's going out, I don't think that ledger is positive for underlying productivity growth going forward. It helps in regard to bums on seats growth, but migration you kind of hope is going to give you a kicker through making your economy a bit more dynamic and efficient. And I don't think the mix is supportive of that at the moment.
Yeah, perfect. And quickly on retail, what do you think is going to happen in the retail sector over the next couple of years?
Right, so there's a couple of things going on in retailing at the moment. Look, if you look at the value of sales in retailing, they're still positive. If you look at the volume of sales, retail sales volumes are down about 3% on 12 months ago. So people, when they spend, tend to have a bit of a fixed budget. And because inflation's moved up and you've got to pay more for something over here, that leaves less to spend somewhere else. And what we're seeing is that what's called the interest-sensitive parts of retailing, which is your furnishings, your carpets, electronic goods, hardware, is getting beaten up an awful lot. Your old mainstays, your necessities, food, well, you're just going to spend money on food. So your staples are going okay, but your discretionaries are under pressure and going to continue to remain under pressure. Migration helps. There's just more bums on seats. But what we are seeing is what's called spending per capita, population adjusted, has hit the reverse button. And I think that's also going to continue for another 12 to 24 months. There's also a funny thing that's going on within retailing. Look, when the economy was locked up, we couldn't travel. Everybody went out there and their travel money was not spent on domestic travel. We went out there and we bought a whole lot of cars, we recarpeted the house, we all bought sparkles. And part of the reason the retail sector has suffered, particularly this year, is because we've unwound that substitution effect. So people have thought, normally when things tighten up, you don't travel, but people haven't traveled for a long time. So guess what? Travel has been a huge priority. And that money has been taken out of normal retail spend. So there's a conventional interest rate story that's tightening up what people are spending. There's also been a bit of a substitution effect that's reversing what we saw in 2020, 2021, that has sort of brought retailing back down to a more normal environment.
No, that's cool. Now I've got we've got about 4 minutes. So I've got quite a lot of rural stuff here. So I'm going to try and pull it all into one little question. Well, sorry, one large question for you. Decarbonisation and the trend there. And what are we seeing around rural land values for dairy and for sheep and beef? And then lastly on that part there, does the world still need our food? So just sort of like a all-encompassing question there.
Well, let's start with the last one. Does the world still need our food? Well, trade and security, also trade is now being dominated by a theme called security, and one aspect of that is security and food. So the short answer is yes. New Zealand's got to work out how we play into that. In a climate change world, food production systems around the world are going to be increasingly challenged, more volatile, and New Zealand included. But that could actually be a relative economic strength because we're going to get knocked around a lot less than other countries around the globe. And we need to work out how we can maximise that. The whole decarbonising debate in New Zealand, I think, has got a little bit, gone too far. New Zealand needs to do its part as global citizens. Are we ever going to change the trajectory for the world in regard to emissions? The answer is no. So why on earth are we beating up the rural sector and not having more of a conversation in regard to what we need to be doing within the cities? Because climate change is everybody's responsibility. And we need to be sensible and pragmatic about where we go. I can't remember the middle question. What was that one, Luke?
It was food or land values around
Yeah.
for
So
farms.
look, there's anecdotally, there's a lot more farms that are coming on the market. A bit of like commercial property, there's a bit of massive mismatch between what vendors think they're worth versus what the buyers are prepared to pay. And the buyers are looking at their cost of capital. When your cost of capital has moved up a long way relative to the return on the investment. So we're going to remain in that mix and standoff until someone blinks. And then portfolios are going to start to adjust. And that is around the corner. You're not seeing the valuers want to revalue at this stage because they don't have an awful lot of transactions to make those revaluation movements.
Mm-hmm.
But do not estimate the impact of a rising cost of capital. It's been absolutely, it's the biggest shift we've seen in percentage points in the last 40 years. And it's going to hit all asset classes. The one we're watching closely is commercial property because cap rates have not moved up anywhere near the amount that they need to. Caveat, glass half full, there's still an awful lot of money globally and locally that's looking for a home. So, I don't think, the adjustment will be overly deep. But, you look at residential property, you still need to have an adjustment to find that base.
Cool. And I've got one last question, and it's from someone who's in the non-for-profit sector. There's a downward trend here in giving and granting, which is making challenges in the space. How do you see there's some advice there for the non-for-profits to tap into some of that money that is out there?
Right. So I've got multiple hats. One of which is Life Education New Zealand, and that's one of my giving back things. So I'll give you just some themes that I've been hot on the past 12 to 24 months because as people go through tougher times, it's a lot harder to extract money. What you need to be doing is that there's money still there, but people want to make sure that it's making an economic impact. The whole idea that they're going to hand out money without accountability, that sort of stuff is being seriously undermined now. It doesn't matter whether you look at non-for-profit, this is a theme across the board. I want to make sure I'm getting value for money. So within life education, what are we doing? We're doing a lot more measurement. How are we assessing impact so that we can go to people and just say, look, we've got distribution capability. This is what we can show, whether it be customer promotional scores, all this sort of stuff. But we are giving providers, supporters, a bit of evidence that we're making a bit of a difference. You just can't go to people anymore and just say, look, can you continue to provide X without being accountable for giving an outcome on the other side?
Yeah, perfect. That's fantastic. Right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Cameron. It's been great to launch this series and our relationship with you. The key takeaway for me was, first of all, I want to say well done to everyone that attended and registered for this webinar. You're already ahead of the game with your competitors by coming along to something like this. And I felt like there's the words that you were saying here is that there's going to be actual competition out there, and the better operators will flourish through using technology and productivity targets and looking at margin and those sorts of things. So, that's exciting. I think it's like a bit of a game out there now, whereas wasn't a few years ago. It was sort of everyone could sort of roll through and do all right, but now it's actually, getting into your business, having a look at the aspects that you can influence, get some help, using people like the team at Mallet McLean to run that smarter, better business. So awesome outlook, and I always like when you caveat things with a glass half full, Cameron, because that makes it they're really clear that there's opportunities out there. So once again, thanks, mate. I appreciate it, and go the Highlanders, and we'll catch up with you next time.
All the best.
Thank you.